Paper 7, Literatures of India, Mother of 1084 by Mahashweta Devi. Session number 49. Session title, Life and Achievement of Mahashweta Devi. This is an image of Mahashweta Devi, and this image is published by yeshnews.com. Let us now look into the life of Mahashweta Devi. Mahashweta Devi was born in 1926 in Dhaka, Bangladesh, to literary parents. Her father, Manish Ghatak, was a well-known poet and novelist of the Kalur movement who used the pseudonym Jubanashwa. Ghatak's youngest brother was noted filmmaker Ritvik Ghatak. Mahashweta Devi's mother, Dharitri Devi, was also a writer and a social worker whose brothers were very distinguished in various fields, such as the noted sculptor Sankha Chaudhary and the founder editor of the Economic and Political Weekly of India, Sachin Chaudhary. Mahashweta's first schooling was in Dhaka, but after the partition of India, she moved to West Bengal in India. She joined the Rabindranath Tagore founded Vishwabharati University in Shantiniketan and completed a BA Honours in English and then finished an MA in English at Calcutta University. She later married renowned playwright Bijon Bhattacharya, who was one of the founding fathers of the IPTA movement. In 1948, she gave birth to Nabarun Bhattacharya, one of Bengal's and India's leading novelists, whose works have been noted for their intellectual vigor and philosophical flavor. She got divorced from Bijon Bhattacharya in 1959. In 1964, she began teaching at Vijayagad College, an affiliated college of the University of Calcutta system. During those days, Vijayagad College was an institution for working class women students. During that period, she also worked as a journalist and as a creative writer. She was more famous for her work related to the study of the Lodhas and Shabars, the tribal communities of West Bengal. Women and Davis, she was also an activist who is dedicated to the struggle of tribal people in Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. In her elaborate Bengali fiction, she often depicted the brutal oppression of tribal people and the untouchables of potent authoritarian upper caste landlords, lenders, and venal government officials. She has written a highly reclaimed novels, and at the same time, she believed that the real history is made by ordinary people. Her accomplishments. A prolific and best-selling author of novels and short stories in Bengali, Mahashweta Devi is equally well known for her pioneering work among the most downtrodden in the Indian society, the dispossessed tribals and the marginalized segments such as landless laborers of eastern India. The quarterly Bortika that she had been editing since 1980 has been a mouthpiece for these people. Mahashweta's writings are often based upon meticulous research conducted sometimes via unconventional means into the history of the people she wrote about. Unlike other Bengali authors, Mahashweta Devi works have been translated into many languages. She has received many awards, including Sahitya Academy in 1979, prestigious Gnanpith Award in 1996, Raymond Magsaysay Award in 1996, and for her work among the tribals, the Padma Shri in 1986. Mahashweta Devi was the leading contemporary writer in Bengali, the language of the state of West Bengal in eastern India, and of neighboring Bangladesh, as well as an author of more than 100 books, including novels, plays, and collections of short stories. Translations her Translations of her into other Indian languages and into English have brought her national and international recognition. One of several modern Bengali writers committed to social and political critique from a leftist perspective, Mahashweta wrote about peasants, outcast women, tribal people, and who live in the forest region of India and other marginalized groups struggling to survive and resisting their exploitation by dominant groups. Mahashweta's fiction and plays are distinguished by a powerful, direct, unsentimental style and by the subtlety and sensitivity with which she approaches the themes of struggle, resistance, and empowerment. Bengali fiction from the 1930s onward reflects the growing radicalization of various segments of Bengali society, including the rapidly growing middle class and urban poor since the 1920s, when sharecroppers revolted against landlords and the British colonial government. Bengal has been the arena of a series of peasant uprisings and unrest among the masses. The region was devastated by a man-made famine in 1943. When India was partitioned in 1947, the eastern portion of Bengal became East Pakistan, a part of the newly formed nation of Pakistan, which had been conceived as a homeland for the Muslim populations of the Indian subcontinent. As a result, the whole of Bengal was torn apart by Hindu Muslim communal riots and the massive displacement of population. Exploited as much in independent India as in the colonial era, the Munda and other tribal peoples in Bengal and the neighboring state of Bihar rose in revolt, and in the 1960s, urban students participated in peasant and tribal struggles in a movement known as the Naxalbari movement, after the village where it began, only to be brutally suppressed by the Bengal state government. Yet another upheaval was caused by East Pakistan's proclamation of independence from Pakistan as the new nation of Bangladesh in 1970. Mahashweta and other major Bengali writers such as Manik Bandyopadhyay and Hassan Aziz ul Haq have responded to these events with fiction that shifted the focus of modern Bengali literature from the lives of the educated urban middle class people to the politics of the exploitation of the underclasses. Mahashweta's contributions to literary and cultural studies. Mahashweta Devi has made important contributions to literary and cultural studies in this country. Her empirical research into oral history as it lives in the cultures and memories of tribal communities was a first of its kind. Her powerful, haunting tales of exploitation and struggle have been seen as rich sites of feminist discourse by leading scholars. Her innovative use of language has has expanded the conventional borders of Bengali literary expression. Standing as she does at the intersection of vital contemporary questions of politics, gender, and class, she is a significant figure in the field of socially committed literature. Mahashweta Devi quite often refuses to have connection with any school of thought, yet her sympathetic portrayal of her subjugation of women and consequent revolt invariably adds to a feminist dimension to her work. But Mahashweta, like a subaltern, is scrupulous in her consideration towards women. In other words, she doesn't regard women as separate entity, but treats their subordination as linked to the oppressions of class and caste. The women characters in her works are stronger when compared to men. The men appear to be lacking insight into what is happening to their being and remain for a moment passive spectators as their counterparts pass through the trying situation created by an equally indifferent establishment. She stands with few equals among today's Asian writers in the trying dedication and directness which she has turned writing into a form of service to the people. The aspect that makes Devi different from her predecessors and the contemporary writers is her sincere commitment and strong willpower in supporting the suppressing masses, especially the trials and women. Breast Giver, translated by Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak and collected in Breast Stories, represents breast as a commodity of consumption. Jashoda, a poor Brahmin woman, is paid for breastfeeding the grandsons of Halders, a rich and prosperous Brahmin family. In the course of time, she begins to suffer from the breast cancer and dies destitute. As a realist is entrenched in subaltern consciousness, Mahashweta ideally should puncture and deflate the grand narratives of structural tyranny of allegories. Allegory is possible only at the cost of the marginal and the subaltern. Should breast giver or mother of 1084 be taken as allegories of oppression, or should they be taken as chronicles of individuals? Can mutually incompatible ingredients like history, ideology, realism, allegory be sustained in one organic whole? Mahashweta's fiction is a crucible in which all these elements amalgamate into a narrative which is discursive, allegorical, real, and historically verifiable at the same time. True it is that she doesn't do away with story or narrative altogether, but her story has the potential to rip apart the canonical imperial narrative from within. The colonial and patriarchal discourses that are largely premised upon series of binary opposition, such as colonized, imperialism, nationalism, man public, private center, periphery, produces a violent hierarchy. In this hierarchy, the colonized, the marginalized culture, the women are branded as a deviant, disruptive group both socially and culturally. In such binarism, one term forcefully gowns the other. Mahashweta's fiction aims at inverting such hegemonical overprivilege, errors signifying system of relationships and attempts to bring low what was high through the strategies of subversion and reversion and reversal. Her stories come across as the post colonial, subaltern, gendered responses that serve to topsy turvy such hierarchical structures, generating aesthetics of opposition in the process. The subaltern groups are always subject to the dominance of the other, even when they rebel and rise up. According to the subaltern school of historians, Indian history has always been dominated by elitism. It has originated as an ideological product of the ruling elite, and so it attributes all the major achievements in the history of the Indian nation to the elite personalities, institutions, activities, and ideas. Ranjit Guha calls the history of Indian nationalism a sort of spiritual biography of the Indian elite. According to him, this kind of historical writings are prejudiced as these fail to acknowledge and explain the contribution made by the masses. The subalternist problematic, the ideological appropriation of history, and make an attempt to highlight the contribution of the subordinate classes and groups in the making of history. Mahashweta's fictional narratives are very close to subalternist nation of historiography. The breast is a source of food and livelihood. Jashoda is paid to breastfeed the many children in the extended family of her master and mistress. Her abundant milk supports her own crippled husband and family. The names of the characters are not casually chosen. Jashoda is the mother of Krishna. There are many layers to these stories, and therefore many interpretations, each reading many levels, and each reader may discover a different slant. The final story in this collection was perhaps the least intriguing, focusing on a respectable middle class photographer Apin, who is fascinated by the lovely breasts of a tribal woman, Gangor. Davy's stories are remarkable for their complete lack of sentimentality. The hard life stories of the tribal who are oppressed by the moneylenders and landlords, condensed to the by the government and aided in uselessly inappropriate ways by charity groups and well-meaning city people, are described in her distinctively matter-of-fact style. The history of the region is integral to many stories, but it is taken for granted and never explained. Many readers may miss the finer details of the classes and cultures, but will still be shaken by the stories themselves, standing as she does at the intersection of vital contemporary questions of politics, gender, and class. She is a significant figure in the field of socially committed literature. Recognizing this, we have conceived a publishing programmer which encompasses a representation look at the complete her novels, her short fiction, her children's stories, her plays, her active prose writings. This series is an attempt to introduce her impressive body of work to a readership beyond Bengal. It's also an overdue recognition of the importance of her contribution to the literary and cultural history of our country. The preceding statement amply illustrates Mahashweta Devi's literary enterprise and its constituent elements. She defines literature as a responsible act that originates from the historical commitments of the writer. These historical commitments necessitate literature to be written from a certain political stand so as to strive towards its aim of achieving the transformation of the unjust social system. In short, literature for her is a powerful, political, committed statement in favor of the subaltern. Her creative writings transcend the bounds of literariness and present themselves as powerful socio-political and historical tracts. Mahashweta concerns obviously align her with the subaltern and their existential dilemmas. For her, literature is a recuperative act. It involves the recuperation of the subaltern farm, the abyss of silence and misery. The final aim of this recuperation is the insertion of the subaltern voice, their experiences and emotions, worldview and realities into the mainstream. Writing for her is a creative act, a brave act that helps her transcend the sense of shame or guilt. The reason and inspiration for her writing are those people who are exploited and used and yet do not accept defeat. Mahashweta Devi tells the endless source of ingredients for writing is in these amazingly noble suffering human beings. Why should I look for my raw material elsewhere once I have started knowing them? Sometimes it seems to me that my writing is really their doing. At this is truly the age where the Juta is Japani, Patloon is Englishstani, the topi is Rusi, but the dil is always Hindustani. My country, torn, tattered, proud, beautiful, hot, humid, cold, sandy, shining India. My country, post-colonial scholar Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak has translated Devi's short stories into English, most of notably 1995 collection Imaginary Maps published by Routledge. Mahashweta Devi, a prominent Bengali writer and social activist who immersed herself in the lives of India's poor and marginalized as she chronicled the injustice against them in fiction, died on July 28th in Kolkata, and she was 90. The cause was a heart attack and multiple organ failure, her grandson, Tathagata Bhattacharya, said. Miss Devi had cast off the trappings of the middle class she was born into and chose to live simply, often roaming the country with her subjects as she did research. In more than 100 novels and short stories, she wrote of India's tribal communities and Maoist rebels, prostitutes and nomads, beggars and laborers. In 1997, she earned the Raymond Magsaysay Award, which has been called the Asian Nobel Prize for her writing and activism on behalf of tribal communities. In the year 2016, Mahashweta Devi ceased to writing.